Hi, everyone. I'm Steph.
And I'm Lisa.
And together we are PD Connect. Thank you so much for joining us. We have our guest speaker here today, Dr. Terry Ellis. I'm going to read a little bit of a bio here, and then you get to take the floor. All right. Dr. Terry Ellis is an associate professor and chair of the Department of Physical Therapy and the director of the Center for Neurorehabilitation at Boston University. That's where Lisa applied, if you didn't hear that earlier.
Okay. And got in.
Got in, but didn't go. Dr. Ellis is also the director of the American Parkinson's Disease Association National Rehabilitation Resource Center.
Wow, that's a big deal, guys.
Yes. Her research is funded by NIH and several Parkinson's foundations and focuses on investigating the impact of exercise and rehabilitation on community mobility and individuals with Parkinson's disease.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
Dr. Ellis has a PhD in behavioral neurosciences from Boston University and is a licensed physical therapist with board certifications in neurological physical therapy. She has published numerous articles and lectures internationally on topics related to rehabilitation, exercise, and mobile health technologies in persons with Parkinson's disease. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Guys, we are in for a huge treat. This is amazing. Thank you, Dr. Ellis.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This is a big treat, and I'm impressed with the number of people on this call, so this better be good. So thank you all for joining. At Lisa's request, I'm going to focus my talk on improving balance and walking in people with Parkinson's disease. What does it take? And at the end, I'm also going to talk a little bit about how to stick to exercise, how to make it part of your life and keep going, sort of over the long haul. So we'll touch on that a little bit at the end. How long do you want me to go for, and how long do you want me to leave for Q&A?
Oh, we have all day. I mean, you're 3 hours ahead of us. It's only 2:30 here, so
all right.
We appreciate whatever time you can give us. Thank you.
Okay. All right, let's do it. All right. So let's see here. Okay. So I wanted to start off with just talking about this recent study. This was a survey that was administered to 850 people with Parkinson's disease, and asking people what their priorities were. Sort of what were the issues that people are most challenged by or most interested in improving. And so I asked you, what are the symptoms that you have or the challenges that you face that you would like help with or you would like to see improved or sort of better treatments for? Well, in this survey, I highlighted this section here because this section here was highly sort of ranked as problematic and wanting better treatments. Things like balance and falls, overall sort of day-to-day movement, and walking. Right? So those were sort of the big priorities that stood out in this particular study. So I am going to focus my talk on these things. Right? What do we do about balance? What do we do to improve walking? What are some of the things that we can do to improve these areas? All right, so let's start with balance. First we have to understand what goes wrong with balance before we figure out what to do about it, right? What goes wrong with balance? And in this particular picture here, this is from a study, and this is somebody standing with their feet kind of close together, and the red dotted line represents people with Parkinson's disease. And the dotted line out here represents people without Parkinson's disease that are just stooped forward. And then the outside line represents people that don't have Parkinson's disease and are not stooped forward. And what this study looks at is the sort of, we call it margins of stability. So when you're standing with your feet next to each other, how far can you lean or reach forward or sideways or backwards without falling, while controlling what we call your center of mass? And what this study shows is that people with Parkinson's disease in the middle red here can't lean very far, right? Can't lean very far without feeling unsteady or even falling. whereas people on the outer circle here without Parkinson's disease can lean or reach much further. So that's one of the things that's a challenge for people with Parkinson's disease. One of the reasons why balance is problematic. And the other thing that is particularly relevant for people with Parkinson's disease is, you know, when you're gonna take a step, let's say you're standing still and you're gonna take a step forward. Well, in order to take that step forward, you have to shift your weight onto the other leg, right? And that frees up the leg that's gonna step. Well, people with Parkinson's disease have trouble shifting. They only shift a little bit. And when you only shift a little bit over, it's hard to unweight that leg and take a step. So that's what can make it difficulty to actually take that first step forward, right? And it might only go a little bit, or it might be a smaller step than what's desired. Whereas people without Parkinson's disease shift their weight, like in the blue line and the red line here, further over to unweight this leg to take a step. But people with Parkinson's have this yellow line, which means they didn't shift far enough over. Okay, so that's another sort of problem in understanding why is balance problematic in people with Parkinson's. Another thing is what we call reactive balance. So let's say you're walking or standing and somebody nudges you and pushes you a little bit, and you have to react and catch your balance. Well, people with Parkinson's disease tend to have kind of an inflexible pattern. And so I use this picture of a tree trunk here, kind of falling over like timber. You know, has anybody ever experienced that? So whereas people that don't have Parkinson's disease have a little bit more flexibility, sort of leaning or bending and using different strategies that involve the ankles and the hips and even taking a step. And people with Parkinson's disease tend to have less flexibility. The other thing is that if you get nudged and you have to take a step to prevent yourself from falling, well, people with Parkinson's tend to take smaller steps and turn on the muscles a little more slowly. And so if the muscles are turned on more slowly and that results in a smaller step, sometimes that can be ineffective in preventing a fall, right? And so again, we want to start with trying to understand what the problems are with balance. So when we think about treatments for balance and treatments for walking in that regard, basically, this is a study that looked at like all the different components of walking and balance. So you can break down walking and balance into a whole bunch of different small components. And what this slide shows is that this is responsiveness to levodopa. So the things that are way over on this side tend to get better with the medicine, the Parkinson's medicine. But the things on this side don't get better with the medicine and actually might even get a little worse. And this is the same with surgery, like deep brain stimulation. And so what happens is the medicines can help with some aspects of walking and balance, like taking a little bit bigger step or walking a little bit faster, or maybe swinging the arms a little bit better. But certain aspects of balance, like turning, like initiating walking, like this controlling your center of mass back and forth and side to side, that slide I showed you earlier about only being able to control it a little bit, not very far, those things are not helped by the medicine and by the surgery. So the bottom line is here that medicine and surgery, they improve a lot of things like tremor and stiffness and slowness. It's kind of the cardinal signs of Parkinson's disease, but they're not as helpful with walking and balance. And so that's why rehabilitation is so important, because rehabilitation probably has the best effect in improving balance and walking in people with Parkinson's disease. So what do we know? What are the studies? There's been a whole lot of studies in the rehab field looking to reduce falls and improve balance in people with Parkinson's disease. So in this figure here, each of these red squares here is a separate study. So all of these studies have been published looking at the effects of some sort of exercise in reducing falls in people with Parkinson's disease. And this diamond down the bottom represents the summary effect. It's kind of like the average effect when you look at all of those studies together to try to figure out, well, what can we understand about the ability of exercise to reduce falls? And the bottom line here is that in this summary study that looks at all these studies together, exercise was found to reduce the rate of falls by 26% in people with Parkinson's disease. So that's actually a pretty good effect, right? There is a significant reduction in falls in people with Parkinson's disease who engage in exercise. All right. Now you might ask, well, what kind of exercise? What does it matter what I do? It does to some degree, but there's some variability here. So what this shows is that exercises that work on gait and balance, so specifically geared towards gait and balance, have been shown to reduce falls. Also, strengthening exercises have been shown to reduce falls, and things like Tai Chi, right? So what this tells me is that there's a lot of different options that you can implement or that you can take part in that will help reduce falls in Parkinson's disease. And that's the good news. Probably what matters is that these all are contributing in different ways. For example, let's talk about Tai Chi. Well, Tai Chi involves a lot of standing and controlling that center of mass in different directions. Remember, that was one of the things at the beginning we said was problematic, inability to control that center of mass very far. And Tai Chi helps to work on that. The resistance training helps because it helps you to turn the muscles on faster, which is necessary to take a step and prevent falling. So that's why resistance training or strengthening exercises are also beneficial. And then practicing the certain gait tasks, like shifting your weight more onto one leg so that you can unweight the leg to step, is also beneficial. And then certain balance exercises like reaching and controlling that center of mass. So there's lots of different ways to come at this, which is the good news, because a lot of the exercise programs that you're probably involved in do a little bit of all of these things, right? Or maybe you take a specific Tai Chi class or a specific strengthening class that might help these aspects of balance. The other thing that I wanted to point out in this study is that they looked at whether supervised exercise programs, whether the outcomes were any different compared to those that weren't supervised. In other words, when I say supervised, I mean, did people that went to a clinic or that did the exercises under the supervision of some sort of physical therapist or exercise professional that was leading the class, they had better outcomes than people who just did their exercises on their own at home with no instructor. Well, why do you think that is? Why would the supervision matter? There's probably a couple things. Supervision leads to better adherence, right? When you have a teacher or instructor, you're probably more likely to show up and go and do the exercises, right? When left to your own, you might do sometimes and might not do it other times. So it has to do with the dosing. When you have supervision, you're more likely to just engage in the exercises more often. The other thing is when it's done under supervision, it's more likely to be a bit more challenging, right? And a bit more sort of orchestrated, so that it's a little bit more challenging than left to your own. And especially if you're by yourself at home, you have to be careful of safety. You have to make sure you're safe. And it's easier to challenge yourself sort of more when you're, with somebody who can, make sure that you don't fall. So another big message from these studies is that there was a more robust decline in falls in people who were earlier on in the disease. So what this means is that, historically, a lot of times people with Parkinson's disease would wait until they have a lot of falls or until they're falling before they seek physical therapy services or before they engage in an exercise program. And what this study shows is the earlier, the better. The earlier, the better. And so this lower disease severity group had a bit better outcome on this side of the line compared to this side. And so the message here is it's never too late or too early to start, right? It's good to start early. You don't have to be falling to work on your balance. In fact, that's a good time to work on it and to take sort of preventative steps to enhance balance before there's falling or before there's a lot of falling. Okay, so here, what do? There's a lot of different options here. So this is just some pictures of different things that have been shown to improve balance in people with Parkinson's disease. I mentioned Tai Chi earlier. There's also quite a bit of studies on dance. And this is a picture of the tango. So dance has been shown to improve balance and reduce falls in people with Parkinson's disease. Also, things like, you can see these things, this is a challenging task where this person is doing like agility training, stepping over these bars. Again, this is something, it's better to do with supervision, so you're safe and don't risk falling. Also, what's been shown is that adding a cognitive task to the motor task can be beneficial. So let's say, for example, here, you see these colored little pads on the floor. And, the instructor can sort of yell out, left foot, right foot on the green, left foot on the green dot or right foot on the yellow dot. So that kind of challenges your thinking at the same time as challenging your balance. And that's been shown to be beneficial in Parkinson's disease. It's also important to sort of get exposed to different environments. Like here's uneven surfaces outside. Here's a crowded environment. Oftentimes people with Parkinson's can get fearful of crowded environments because of fear of that being nudged. And so practicing those kinds of things can be very beneficial. Also, there was a large study done looking at walking on a treadmill, and see that TV up there. This is a virtual reality study. And on this TV, you can see the footprints of the person walking. So they see their footprints, that's them walking down the sidewalk. And in that virtual reality, they'll move in objects into the path so that the person has to step over the objects. So there's a little bit of cognitive training and motor training at the same time. And this study found that this approach here was beneficial in reducing fall rates in people with Parkinson's disease. So what's the bottom line here with regard to balance? Well, basically, highly challenging balance programs appear to have more robust outcomes overall. So balance programs have to be challenging, like a little bit of more challenge than you're currently able to do. Always like pushing the system a little bit, so that you're challenged at that just right level. And it's also important to balance safety. You want to make sure you're safe when you're challenging yourself. And so another message is that the combination of resistance training and balance training was found to be more effective than balance training alone. So basically, strengthening is an important part of balance training. Being able to recruit the necessary muscles fast enough to have an effective balance reaction. And then another key message is targeting balance earlier in the disease process is good. We want to get people in earlier, even before falls, or even when falls are relatively infrequent, to try to take preventative measures. And then the last kind of bullet here is the addition of cognitive training to motor training might have added value in decreasing falls. So stimulating your mind and your body at the same time can also be helpful in reducing falls. Okay, so that's like a little short segment on balance and falls, and then I was going to move to walking. But does anybody have any questions? Any thoughts, or I can wait to the end?
Let's wait to the end. I'm sure we're going to have lots of questions. Thank you so much. This is great.
Okay, great. Let's do that. We'll wait all the way to the end for the questions. Okay, so let's talk about walking. What are the challenges with walking in Parkinson's disease? Well, I broke it down into three things. Not enough walking, so amount of walking is too little. Too much sedentary time, not enough physical activity. Walking can be slow, too slow, hard to keep up with people. And then the quality can be diminished, sort of like those short shuffling steps. All right. So here's a study in which they looked at how much walking people were doing who didn't have Parkinson's disease. And they were doing, in this particular study of about 100 people, about just under 8,000 steps a day. Does everybody know about those steps per day? 5,000, 10,000? You know, people on the higher end, you know, above 7,500 is considered active, right? On that higher end. Below 5,000 is considered sedentary. So here, healthy people were walking about 7,800, so that would be considered active. But people with Parkinson's disease were walking only about 5,500, borderline sedentary. What I want to point out here too is that people with Parkinson's disease, even early on, these are people just diagnosed, they were already walking less than people without Parkinson's disease. So what we know is that physical activity, in the case of walking, tends to drop off early, probably because of the stiffness and the more challenging it is to move. We looked specifically, this is a recent study, this is just under review right now that we hope is published pretty soon. And we wanted to look at intensity of walking. So what that means is, the number of steps that people are taking every minute when they walk. And intense, like moderate intensity to high intensity walking is considered up here in this range, like at least 80 steps or maybe even over 100 steps in a minute. And in this graph, you can see a couple things here. The blue bars are people walking over 7,500 steps per day. So those are their active group. And in the red bar, this is people with Parkinson's disease walking less than 7,500 steps per day. So they're somewhat less active. And this over here is the number, the minutes that people spend walking this number of steps per day. So what is the message here? What we found in this group, almost 100 people with Parkinson's disease, this is with no rehab intervention, no exercise, just observational. We measured them walking over the course of a week. And what we found was that most people with Parkinson's disease were only walking 1 to 19 steps in a minute. So that means they were probably kind of puttering around the house, walking a little bit, standing, sitting down, walking a little bit. There were hardly any steps up in the high intensity or moderate intensity range. And this tells me that there's not much continuous walking. There's not much fast walking, right? Mostly sort of probably in the house walking. So this is another thing we've observed in Parkinson's, not enough walking and not intense enough. And then when we look at quality of walking, what we see in Parkinson's disease is short steps. Short steps, more asymmetrical, so not so even, and sometimes a high cadence, like lots of short steps instead of longer steps. Okay, so those are the three problems: amount of walking, intensity of walking, and quality of walking. And people here on the call might experience some of this and not some of it, and everybody's different. But what we want to focus on today is what to do about it. What to do about it? How do you remedy this? How do you improve these kinds of things? Well, a few things. Walking on a treadmill has been found to be very beneficial for people with Parkinson's disease. Now, this isn't for everybody, only if you can do this safely. But walking on a treadmill helps improve walking speed, so intensity of walking, and step length, so quality of walking. Why is that? Well, maybe some of you have experienced, you can tell me, that when you go out for a walk, the further along you go, maybe you notice that you slow down. Without even thinking about it, you just kind of slow down and maybe the steps get a little shorter. What the treadmill does is that that belt moves underneath, right? And that belt serves as a pacer. And that pacer doesn't let you slow down, right? In order to keep up, it sort of forces you to take a big step and walk a little faster. And that has been shown to improve walking in people with Parkinson's disease. Now, again, you have to be careful. You have to be safe on this. You have to make sure that this is the right thing for you. Some people have to hold on, to the rails. So, it's good to get the direction, get some input from a physical therapist to determine if this is something appropriate for you. Now, there's also been studies done in Parkinson's disease that looked at brisk walking outdoors. Like, what if I don't have a treadmill? Or what if I don't want to walk on a treadmill? Well, you can do this outdoors. This particular study was done over 6 months, looking at an hour to an hour and a half of walking plus some balance exercises 3 times a week over 6 months. So what they did in this study is they gave people a heart rate monitor. So the heart rate monitor was the way that they were able to maintain that intensity, to make sure they were working sort of hard enough. And by monitoring your heart rate, they could make sure they were staying in that moderate intensity range and didn't peter out. And what they found is that those people with Parkinson's who walked at that moderate intensity pace for 6 months had improved motor symptoms, so less motor symptoms, and then improved walking and balance after 6 months. Walking endurance was better, walking speed was better, and overall balance was better. So basically, practicing the task of walking helps walking, right? You can get benefits. So what if you don't want to wear a heart rate monitor? What are the other options? Or what if some people with Parkinson's disease have a sort of, their heart rate doesn't rise as much as other people's, a dampened heart rate response. That, some people with Parkinson's experience that, or sometimes medicines, if you have some sort of heart conditions, there are some medicines that can also dampen the heart rate. And it might be not a good metric for everybody to use to gauge intensity. Another way that you can do that is to walk to music, right? So you might notice that when you're walking, if you notice this, that you slow down or peter out or your steps get smaller, that's because walking becomes less automatic. You might notice that you have to think about walking. And when you take big steps, when you think about it, you can take bigger steps. You can swing your arms, you can walk faster. But it's really hard to keep thinking about walking. If you're going to go out and walk for 20 minutes or 30 minutes, it's hard to think about quality of walking all the time. And so what music does is it replaces that problematic internal cueing system, which tends to be involved or impaired in people with Parkinson's disease. It replaces that with an external cueing system. So music, people with Parkinson's disease are pretty good at entraining to music. You know how when the music comes on and you're hearing music and you kind of automatically sort of start dancing or bopping up and down a little bit, right? It kind of happens naturally. And you entrain or lock on to the beat of the music. And that's because you can use different pathways in the brain over here instead of the pathways that are involved in Parkinson's disease. And so this gentleman has Parkinson's disease, and you can see him walking somewhat slowly with small steps on your left without music. But when we give him some music.
Okay, turn around right there, Walter, and do that again.
Can you hear that? So the gentleman on the right is listening to music and walking at a certain beat.
Both arms.
116 steps per minute.
Yeah.
Do you see? Does it look like to you that he's walking faster on the right? Right? He's walking faster and taking bigger steps. And that's just in training or locking on to that music. So we're actually doing a study. We'd actually just finished this study, and we're doing other studies. We're working with an industry partner called MedRhythms. And they've actually developed a device that people can use that plays music that can be worn outside while you walk. So So what people do is they put these sensors on their shoe, really small sensor. And that sensor collects certain information about the quality of your walking, mostly the cadence or the number of steps you take in a certain period of time. That data from the sensors gets fed into an algorithm in the phone. Okay. You choose music. You can choose music on the phone. And then that algorithm takes the music and either stretches or compresses the tempo to match your cadence, to match your stepping rate. And then you have these headphones on and you hear the music and you match your walking to the tempo of the music. So we did a study in people with Parkinson's disease, just a small feasibility study in about 23 people with folks from Johns Hopkins. And we did a lot of measurements at the beginning, and we had people wear an activity monitor to measure their walking. And then they walked for 4 weeks, 5 times a week for 30 minutes for 4 weeks using this device in the community on their own. And then we had them come back in and do a final assessment. So this is what it looks like. These are the 3 pieces. You get a phone. Here's the things to use on your shoes, and here are the headphones. So you just put the sensors on the shoe, and then the headphones. These are special headphones that sit in front of your ear, not in your ear. They're bone conducting. So that way you can still hear. You can hear what's going on in the community, and if someone's talking to you, you can hear, which is safer, much safer. And that bone conduction allows you to pick up the beat and hear that rhythm much more easily. And so here's our physical therapist showing this person here how to use the app. Pick the music, hit go, and then start walking. And this is what we found in our study. Well, we found that it went well. Nobody fell while they walked, right? So they were out using the device and nobody fell. So that's a good thing. We wanted to know if it was safe. Then we asked people to walk 20 sessions over 4 weeks. People walked 17.2 sessions on average. Well, I don't know about you, but that's pretty good, right? You know how hard it is to exercise. If someone says do something 5 times a week for 4 weeks, that's hard to do. And the folks in this study did it 17 out of 20 times, which tells me they liked it, right? And then over here, we asked them to walk for at least 30 minutes, and the music shut off at 45 minutes. They walked 39 minutes. 39 minutes. Who does more than what you ask, right? So that's a good thing. We asked people to walk at least 30, and they walked 39. That means they must have liked it, right? And probably the music's still playing, and you keep walking, right, until it stops. So that's a good thing. And then we did a usability. We asked them usability questions. So we asked them if they liked it, if they thought it helped, if they had any problems with the technology. And all these green bars means that people liked it and they didn't have any trouble with the technology. The red suggests that they did have trouble, right? And they had some issue with the technology. So what you see here is mostly green, right? Most of the people didn't have any issues and thought that the technology was easy to use. Now, what happened to amount and intensity of walking? Those were 2 of the things we wanted to tackle. So let's look over here. At baseline, right, this is the amount of walking. People were already, in the sample, they were pretty active, walking just over 8,000 or 8,500 steps. They increased the amount of walking by over 4,000 steps during the intervention. So when they were listening to the music, look down here on the red, when they were walking to the music and listening, they walked an extra 4,300 steps a day. They did a lot more walking when they were using this particular approach. Over here, we looked at the intensity of walking. So remember I showed you that most people with Parkinson's disease were only taking 1 to 20 steps per minute? When they used the device, they went from only having 16 minutes a day on average of moderate intensity walking to 38 minutes a day. What we want is at least 30 minutes a day. to get health benefits. And we see that when they were using the device, they got 30 minutes of that 38 were during the training session. So what this tells us is like sort of proof of concept. This method is helpful in helping people with Parkinson's disease to walk more and to walk faster because they're able to entrain to the external beat or the music. We also looked at quality of walking. So one of the things we don't want is when we increase the tempo of the music, we don't want faster little steps. We want longer, bigger steps. And when we looked at the quality of walking in people with Parkinson's disease, the red line here is steeper. So when we analyzed this data, we found that step length improved. And as gait speed improved, that was driven largely by bigger steps, which is exactly what we want. So this shows us that this approach helped improve the quality of walking in people with Parkinson's disease. Okay, and then our clinical outcomes, when we brought people back in at the end, and we said, okay, let's look at your symptoms. We saw a reduction in the Parkinson's motor symptoms. We saw improvements in walking capacity and even ability to go from sitting in a chair to standing in a chair was faster. And we also saw significant improvements in quality of life. So even in this short period of time, we have some signal here that this is really helpful. Now we're in the midst of our second study. And so we're in the middle of that right now. We're doing a bigger study to see if we can validate these results in even more people. And that study is going to be ongoing until probably the end of the summer. And then after that, we're going to do a large study that will probably be across the country. And that'll be a more definitive study. And at the same time, the company that's making this is going through the FDA process so that this can eventually be approved and get into the hands of people with Parkinson's disease. So how do we think that people will use this in the real world? Well, there's a couple different options. We think that people could use this as a training device, like as a way to exercise. 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, 3 days a week, at least 3 days a week, right? This could be a method to helping people exercise. It's enjoyable, it's fun, and it helps with amount, intensity, and quality of walking, the three things we want to target. Some people who struggle with the quality of walking might be able to use this just to get around. So people that struggle with, just getting from point A to point B or walking from the parking lot into the mall or into the grocery store, they might actually benefit from using this in day-to-day life. That's something we need to test. All right, we haven't tested that yet, and that's coming down the line. Okay. Now, there might be people here who experience what we call freezing of gait. I don't know if anybody here experiences that, where you intend to take a step and move forward, your feet just won't cooperate, right? Feet feel sort of glued to the floor. And there are things that in what the studies tell us basically is that sometimes visual cues can be used to help freezing of gait. Freezing of gait kind of is more kind of in the moment, a discrete episode, like going through a doorway or turning or something specific, maybe a specific area in your house, the same place every time, or a small space, turning in your bathroom or something like that. And so some sort of visual cue, like when you're crossing a threshold, a bright color and a red line on the floor can often help with preventing freezing and being able to take that big step across the threshold. Some people find using like a laser pointer. If you carry a laser pointer in your pocket and you take out that laser pointer and point that light and take a step on the light, take a step on that light, like that you shine in front of you. Sometimes that helps people to be able to sort of prevent freezing. This is somebody here who freezes when he goes through doorways. Every time he goes through this doorway here, it triggers a freeze, right? And then when he goes to turn, there's also some freezing of gait there. Freezing happens during turning because the size of the steps becomes asymmetrical. And when they become asymmetrical, one short, one long, it can trigger a freeze. So here, in this video, we put lines on the floor. So lines on the floor can help overcome freezing. And this gentleman was able to walk through the door by looking at the lines. Now, it's not that you're stepping on the lines per se. It's that the lines form like a visual pattern. And what we help people to do is look through the door, across the lines. And that generally helps people get through the door by looking at those lines. Okay. So the last part, the last segment here that I want to talk about is how do you stick to exercise over time? You know, it's one thing to say, okay, I want to do all those things. I'm in. But how do I do it? You know, what are some ways to help people do it? Well, some people just naturally like to exercise, but not everybody does. Here we have the treadmill, the Swearmaster, the personal draining. So I don't know if any of this resonates with anybody here, but it's important to enjoy exercise, to pick something that you like and that you're going to stick to. It doesn't help to pick something that's supposed to be beneficial if you don't do it. So the good news is that I've described lots of different ways that you can exercise. Walking on a treadmill, walking outside with a heart rate monitor, walking to music, balance, Tai Chi, dancing, gait, working on your walking, balance exercises, all lots of choices that are helpful to find something you enjoy. Sometimes what can get in the way are things like low confidence or low outcome expectation. So low self-efficacy, which is low confidence. In order to build confidence, it's important to start with just a little bit at a time and experience success in what you do. Not trying to start with going from 0 to 5 days a week. That's really hard to do, ramp up that fast. So starting gradually and building confidence so that you can experience success. That builds self-efficacy. You know, things like fear of falling, it's important this is when it's really important to meet with a physical therapist and figure out ways to try to optimize safety so that you can feel safe in challenging yourself. It's important with falling. One of the detriments of falling is not just the fall itself, but it can decrease people's confidence. And decreasing confidence can lead to doing less, sitting more and doing less. And that's not good. That's not good. That can spiral and lead to actually more problems. So we want to figure out ways to keep people safe and active simultaneously. And that, you know, seeing a physical therapist can really help tailor that program to you. A lack of time. Lack of time, nobody has time. Nobody has time, everybody's busy. It's hard for everybody to fit this in. What I notice is that people that are retired have no more time than people that are working. It's busy, you got a lot going on. It's hard to fit in. And sometimes when you're retired, it's even harder because you don't have the structure of a work day. And so we teach people to try to build it into their schedule, like make it a habit. It's really, so, you know, when you when you get out of bed in the morning and you go into the bathroom, you just brush your teeth, right? It's a habit. You just do it. It's part of your day. It's part of what happens when you walk into the bathroom in the morning. You don't walk into the bathroom and say, should I brush my teeth today or should I take the day off? Right? That doesn't happen, right? It's sort of, you just naturally do it. And so treating exercise like that, building it in your day. I'm much more successful if I do it in the morning after my medications kick in. So I'm going to build this in, and 3 days a week, I'm going to exercise at 10 a.m. I'm going to put it in my calendar. I'm going to treat it like a meeting. And after I take my medicines, I eat breakfast, then I do my exercises. And establishing that routine helps with the time management. So again, figuring out how to make it fun is key. And the good thing is there are a lot of options. And then thinking about what is your big picture goal? Why do you want to exercise? Well, most people don't want to exercise for the sake of exercising, but it's a means to another end. Like, what's important to you? What do you value in life? I want to exercise because I want to be able to keep working, or I want to travel. I want to retire and travel like I've always planned to do. Or I want to play with my grandchildren. I want to be out there doing things. And so if you keep those big picture goals in mind, that makes it easier to exercise, right? And not just exercising for the sake of exercising. So another thing that's really helpful in being successful at sticking to it is setting goals. Specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, timely goals, or SMART goals. How many people have ever had an experience where, okay, let's say, I think everybody has experienced, I'm going to go on a diet. I'm going to start next week. Next week's my week. I'm going to start next week. I'm going to eat healthy, and I'm going to start on the diet. Well, next week comes and goes, right? It wasn't very specific, right? There was no plan. There was no specificity. It was vague. Right? So doing the same thing with exercise, I'm going to start next week. I'm going to exercise 5 days. That's it. I'm going to do it. So being specific, like Monday morning, I'm going to go to the exercise class at 10 a.m. Or Monday morning at 10 a.m., I'm going to go for a walk in our neighborhood with my neighbor, Bob. Meeting somebody is really helpful, and doing it with somebody because they hold you accountable. I think you just participated in a virtual exercise class. Is that right? Showing up, right? That's key. Having a place to go, a certain time, people you want to see and say hello to. That makes it easier to stick to it. So an action plan. Who are you going to exercise with? What kind of exercise are you going to do? When are you going to do it? Monday at 10 a.m. Where? At home, at a gym, the online class, in my neighborhood. So being very specific can help you stick to it. So I'm going to talk just big picture for a second about when to exercise and when to engage in rehabilitation. Unfortunately, in this country and in many countries, we take a sort of tertiary approach to our healthcare. We wait till we have a condition and we wait till things get worse before we seek rehabilitation services or seek care. And that's a tertiary approach. It's sort of, you're treating the consequences after they've already happened. What we really want is a secondary prevention approach where, okay, well, now you have a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. What can you do to prevent the sequelae? What can you do to optimize outcome and optimize your day-to-day function before waiting for sort of any kind of decline? Just like the literature I just showed you, those studies I just showed you, shows that people with Parkinson's disease can improve walking and can improve balance by taking action, taking control, and not waiting. So that's really important. Ideally, there's primary prevention, and people are exercising their whole lives and eating well, and that kind of reduces risk of various conditions, lots of different conditions, cancer, heart disease, all those kinds of things. What I want to show you here, this was a study done in people with Parkinson's disease, and people with Parkinson's that had higher physical activity rates. So this red line basically had less or lower or less worse, Parkinson's symptoms. These specific measures were related to gait and balance. So in general, people with Parkinson's that are more active have better, which is lower on the scale, better walking and balance. So it is worth it to stay active because the balance and gait are better when you're more active. And that's why, overcoming that fear or working with a physical therapist to make sure you have the just right challenge is important. This particular study, I just wanted to show you some of this data. This particular study shows that, falling and problems with balance actually can happen earlier than we thought. it basically, what this gets at is a secondary prevention approach. We need to take action early. We need to take action anytime. But what I want to put across is not only later. Later is also important, but also earlier. Okay, starting earlier. So what we propose and what we do here is what we call a secondary prevention model of care, or a dental model. So you know how you go to the dentist? You go to the dentist, what, every 6 months or every year? Even when you don't have a problem, right? You go for a regular checkup. And you go there and they do a bunch of tests. They look at your gums, they look at your teeth, maybe they take some x-rays. And they look at it and they compare it to the last time you were there. And they say, oh, no changes, looks good, keep doing what you're doing. Or they say, oh, we see a little problem over here, you better floss better over here. Or we have a little cavity and we're going to fill that cavity so it doesn't become a big cavity, right? So it's the same thing with rehabilitation in Parkinson's disease. What we do is we see people at the point of diagnosis, and we follow people with Parkinson's every 6 months to a year over the course of their lifetime. Just like you go to the neurologist every 6 months or whatever it is, 3 months or annually for a medication adjustment, you go to a physical therapist for an exercise adjustment. You can't just do one exercise program for life. It has to be adjusted, right? It has to be adjusted to meet your needs based on how you're changing and how you're functioning over time. So we really just put this message out to really, and I don't even just mean physical therapy. Speech therapy is also very important. And getting speech and working on your voice and your loudness, right? And those kinds of things early can be really helpful. Occupational therapy can be very important and very effective in helping people with, daily tasks that you want to engage in for leisure, for fun, for work, whatever they are. So, and then the last slide here is just, we are an APDA, an American Parkinson's Disease National Rehab Resource Center. We have a toll-free phone number and an email address right here, rehab@vu.edu, 1-888-606-1688. You can call us for free or send us an email about any of your questions related to rehabilitation or exercise. And we have licensed physical therapists that respond to you to help to give you the information, that you're looking for. So this is my fabulous team here in Boston. I just want to thank my team here, and they are awesome. I couldn't do the work I do without this fabulous team. And then these are some of my collaborators from around the country, and I just want to shout out with them because they're very instrumental in doing a lot of the research we do related to exercise and Parkinson's. So I think I will stop sharing there so I can see everybody, and then I will open it up for questions.
Looks like there are a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay.
Dr. Ellis, thank you so much for that amazing presentation. So filled with everything.
Really, truly.
It's like a buffet.
We love buffets, don't we? As long as they're free.
Yeah. So great presentation. Yeah, I will make the PowerPoint available. That was the first question there. Can bone conduction devices be used if you wear hearing aids? That's a great question. I'm not sure about that. I think it's going to depend on the amount of hearing loss that people have. So that, now that you asked that question, I'm going to test it. So I think that's really important because a lot of folks wear some sort of hearing aid. So we want to know if this combination can work. Great question. Great question. Is it beneficial to use such things as weight vests? This is from Frank. Weight vests during walking or jogging exercise, even though it might not be for the same duration. So weighted vests are one way to strengthen. And so some people, we've done some studies doing balance training with weighted vests, like squatting, reaching, doing certain balance exercises with a weighted vest on, because it provides some resistance while you're doing certain balance training. In terms of wearing it while you're walking, there's not much that have been done to study that. Most of the time, the studies have been done, like I said, like doing strengthening exercises, like standing up from a chair, squatting, lunges with the weighted vest. But walking, I think, it would depend. I think if it helped with the quality of walking, it might be a good thing. But if it led to a degradation of the quality of walking, it may not be a good thing. It's probably something to run by a physical therapist so they can sort of help you determine whether that's beneficial for you. So how would I rate the elliptical? This is from Mary Adams. How would I rate the elliptical as far as balance training? Okay, good question. The elliptical is really better for aerobic training. So in aerobic exercise is really important. Walking on a treadmill, riding a stationary bike, using an elliptical machine is very beneficial for aerobic exercise where you're a little bit out of breath. And that's really important in Parkinson's disease. I didn't talk about that today specifically because I focused on gait and balance, but I think you listened, I think Daniel Korkos, Dr. Korkos came and talked to you, and he's big, right? We're doing a big study on aerobic training. We're actually one of the sites. So an elliptical is another way to engage effectively in aerobic training. But this is what I want you to think about. When you do aerobic training, you can pick walking on a treadmill, walking briskly outside, using an elliptical machine, using a stationary bike. But how do you know which one to pick? Well, one, pick something you like and pick something you're going to do. Two, you can decide depending on your profile. So for example, if you walk on a treadmill, you can get an aerobic exercise benefit and you're training walking. It's a twofer, right? You get kind of two benefits for the price of one. And so if your goal is to get aerobic exercise and improve your walking, then doing something that includes walking is helpful. If you have a hard time walking because of freezing or festination, and walking is very difficult, then riding a stationary bike might be a great way to get an aerobic exercise program because you're not stuck. You can easily pedal. Pedaling is usually a lot easier than walking. So, if you're afraid you're going to fall on a treadmill, then it might not be a good idea. It won't be a good idea. And sitting on a bike might be safer. So you really have to look at your own individual situation and figure out, okay, what is best for me? What do I feel safest? What are my goals? And where am I going to get the most bang for my buck? Okay. So the elliptical is really better for aerobic and not as much for balance. Okay, let's see. My knees hurt so much. What can I do to still walk? Okay. Yeah, well, that's another thing. If walking hurts your knee pain, then thinking about things like a stationary bike might be a better option. A stationary bike is less pounding and sometimes it doesn't aggravate knee pain so much. So that's an option to try a stationary bike option. Also, people with knee pain doing things in the water, like walking in the water, a pool might be a good option. That can take the pressure and the pounding off your knees. Okay, so here's a question from Sandy. I can't articulate my question. I'm wondering how running versus walking translates in your study. So some people with Parkinson's disease, particularly at the beginning, can still run and get a nice aerobic workout from running. So running is okay as long as the quality is good and the safety is good. But for people who can't run, then walking fast or walking on an incline. So if you're walking on a treadmill and you put it on a little bit of incline and you gradually increase the speed, you can get just as much of an intense workout as you would with running. So both are good, but it's really about quality. As long as you can run safely and the quality is good, then running is great. Okay. And then Leslie writes, my toes are 1 foot spasm. Yeah, after a half a mile. So sometimes the music can help with that because you're in training to the beat. But that might also be a medication issue. It depends on the turning can be, I'd have to see it, or somebody would have to look at it to see if it's something called dystonia or some turning of the foot that happens. And that can be a problem, looking at your medication and looking to make sure your medication is well regulated is something I would consider doing. But sometimes music can help. because you're actually in training to the beat and it helps you to land on your heel. Okay, and then Dean with the headband. All right, Dean asks, what about rock steady boxing? Yeah, there are elements of rock steady boxing that are aerobic, that help with aerobic exercise, and there are some aspects that help with balance and walking. So it's really, rock steady boxing in my mind is a little bit of a lot of things. The punching of the bag and the rotating back and forth like this works on your balance. It works on controlling and moving that center of mass over your base of support. Does it improve walking? It depends on how much walking you're actually doing in the boxing class. There is some variability between one boxing class and another, so it depends specifically on what's happening. But in general, the boxing classes are good. They stimulate physical activity. They tend to be more aerobic in nature. They do usually have some balance, training elements to them. What about golf? All right, well, golf can be a good thing because it really works on your sort of trunk rotation and that trunk stiffness, which can be a good thing. It's also, are you walking? Are you walking the course when golfing? It's great if you can walk and have somebody else carry your bag, or have somebody else put the bag in the cart, but do some walking. Maybe even alternating, walking from one hole to the next and then taking the cart and then walking again, so that can be very helpful. Is there a sweet spot? This is from Frank. Is there a sweet spot in determining the rate of pedaling versus strenuousness when biking? Well, I don't know if you know, Jay Alberts has done some work with pedaling and, Pedal for Parkinson's. And so he, but generally tries to keep the pedaling rate up above 80 or so, so that's a pretty fast rate of pedaling. It's not clear how important that particular element is, but you can alternate when you bike between low resistance and pedaling more quickly, and then have some time where you're pedaling more slowly, but you've increased the resistance. Both of those can be beneficial. So it can help to do a little bit of both, within your walking session or within your biking session. I have problems with walking or stepping backwards, and yeah, stepping backwards is a problem. Mostly it can be a problem because the steps are too small, and then the weight, your center of mass, gets ahead of your feet. And then once the center of mass goes ahead of your feet or behind your feet, going backwards, then you can elicit a fall. So first of all, I would say if you fall a lot walking backwards, to try not to walk backwards so much. That's one thing. And if you do have to walk backwards, to deliberately take big steps when you walk backwards. And that keeps your center of mass over your base of support, so you're less likely to fall outside of that. I see a lot of people, like when they open the refrigerator, they take out a big heavy thing of milk and then try to back up. Oh, that is a tough one. You don't want to do that. You don't want to pick up something heavy, or pick up anything really, and then start walking backwards. That's not good, especially, you don't want to land on the kitchen floor. So avoiding, it's better to, walk sideways sometimes, or turn and walk forward and try to avoid backwards walking. Okay. In terms of barriers, oh yeah, what about a lack of energy? Yeah, sometimes people with Parkinson's can experience fatigue, and it's really quite variable. But I think one thing you want to do, one thing we try to get people to do, is to figure out the relationship between exercise and fatigue. Because sometimes people think exercise is going to make fatigue worse, but sometimes exercise actually makes fatigue better. And so keeping track of when you exercise and then how you feel afterwards during the day, keep some sort of a log so that you know whether exercise actually makes the fatigue worse or better. Because if it makes it better, that can motivate you to do it so that you'll feel like you have more energy. Okay, someone says, what about bowling? Well, we haven't studied bowling per se, but hey, if you like it, it keeps you moving, right? That will challenge your balance because you've got to walk ahead, throw a ball, let go of it, and hopefully get it to go straight. which I know doesn't happen for me. So yeah, I mean, that can work on your balance. And like I said, any kind of physical activity that keeps you moving and keeps you engaged. And bowling is usually social. That's another thing I didn't talk about, but making exercise social is good for lots of reasons, right? Socializing is important. If one is interested in volunteering, do you have to be local? Well, in the studies that we have going on right now, you have to be local, but we're trying to do the big study with the rhythm and the music. We're trying to do the big study when we get to that. We're trying to do that nationwide so that you don't have to be local, because we want to enroll a lot of people in that study. So we want to be able to basically mail you the device and with instructions on what to do, or have a Zoom meeting like this, to enroll people in the study. So stay tuned. That's coming. We hope to do more of those studies soon. I believe the term used was a dampened heart rate. How do I monitor my heart rate with exercise if I have a dampened? Yeah. So if your heart rate doesn't rise that much, even though you're working hard, then it's better to use what we call perceived exertion, rate of perceived exertion, like on a scale of 1 to 10. So an exercise level of 10 would be, the hardest, most strenuous exercise you've ever done. An exercise at a 1 would be like pretty much sitting down and doing not much, right? Where you want to be, moderate intensity exercise is at least around a 5 or a 6. So you want to be at least in that 5 to 6. If you want to work more vigorously, you could be up to a 7 or so. But you want to be at least a 5. So you can gauge that by saying, okay, this is like, and another thing you can do is you should be sweating. When you're doing exercise, you should be sweating, and you should be able to talk, but not, necessarily sing, let's say. Okay, so you should be a little bit out of breath. Like you can still talk and carry on a little bit of a conversation, but maybe not a full paragraph. Okay, so it's somewhat strenuous. All right, a little bit out of breath, starting to sweat, in that 5 to 6 range on a scale of 1 to 10. Okay, what suggestions? Oh,
Well, let's see, do we have more questions here? But I just wanted to say, wow, you are just such an incredible teacher, Dr. Ellis. We are so lucky to have you explain to us in a really easy to understand fashion how, balance and exercise and walking and barriers and all these different things are related. And the music, your new research study on music, using music, is just fascinating. And we're super excited to help you out in that way once you launch nationwide.
Yes, please let
great.
us know.
I will certainly let you know when we're at that point. So anybody here that wants to participate could join in.
Great.
That'd be great.
Sounds great.
Well, I appreciate the invitation. I appreciate your attention. And, thank you for having me. Hopefully everybody learned something. And
Absolutely.
thanks again. Thanks again for having me.
Thank you. We
Absolutely.
we hope to see you again soon. This has been wonderful, and keep up the great work. Thank you so much. We love your passion for everything too.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Yes, have a great
Bye-bye.
night. Thank you for your time.
Bye-bye.